Hello students, welcome to Learner's Planet. Let us continue with the chapter Control and Coordination. So far we had studied about the control and coordination in animals, and then we started with the process in the plants. So basically this process, as we had seen in plants and animals, is very much different from each other, isn't it? Animals are highly complex organisms, and they are heterotrophic, and they can move from one place to another, and of course all these characteristics are very much different from those of the plants, and this is the reason why there is a difference in the control and coordination processes too. So now these plants, we had studied that these particular plants or these living organisms which are autotrophic, in them the control and coordination is taking place via hormones only. There is no different for the nervous system developed for the purpose. It is only these particular hormones which are they are sufficient for the for such type of process. The type of stimulus is of course different in the case of plants. It is usually an external physical factor, or whatever is the stimulus, the response is usually common in all these organisms. And what is that response given to a particular stimulus? It is in the form of a movement. Now movement is sometimes what we can observe clearly. In plants, such movement is observed in the form of growth. Rather, as they cannot move from one place to another, so these type of movements are something uncommon. But of course they show the movement, and of course it is in a form of what? In the form of growth. And if growth is concerned, then the process is supposed to be very slow. There are some of the movements which are exactly not they are not associated or linked with the growth, and therefore on this basis the movement of these plants is categorized into two categories, and we had already studied about these basic things in the previous session. So now let us just summarize it, and then we will we'll go in detail about each type of movement. So the plant movement, it is observed in a particular direction. See, these are stationary organisms, so of course the part of a plant is going to show a response to a particular stimulus. Now these particular stimulus, they are either present all around, but if they are from particular direction, then of course we can observe that some movement are going towards the stimulus, or sometimes they are moving away from such type of stimulus. And the other which are free, they are independent of such type of direction. So such type of movements, they can be classified on the basis of two things. One is the direction, and second is the connection with the growth. So these particular movements, either they are classified as the directional movement or non-directional movement. Directional movement is known as tropism, whereas non-directional, it is known as a nestism or the nastic movements. Now directional movement, they are always linked with the growth. They are absolutely growth dependent processes, and therefore as we can say, they are actually directional. So direction means either it is towards the stimulus, and then it would be known as positive movement or positive tropism, whereas if it is away from the direction of stimulus, it would be known as negative tropic movement. So this growth, it is that suppose there is an increase in the length of the stem. So this increase in length is observed as a growth, but if it bends towards or the stimulus or away from the stimulus, then it would be known as positive or the negative tropism. Whereas in the case of nastic, no such positive or negative things are observed, as these are independent of the direction. It doesn't matter that from where the stimulus is coming. Wherever is the stimulus generated, the direction is going to be in a particular way only. It is not dependent on the direction of a stimulus. It is, we can in short say, it is all throughout the part of that organ, the part of the plant which is actually under the this process is going to show this particular effect. But of course, these nastic movements, they may be linked to the growth processes, or they may be growth independent. So these nastic movements, they are showing both the things. Growth, they may be linked with the growth, or they may be independent of the growth. Now the point is, when these are linked with the growth, the movement or that particular process or that effect is going to be established for forever. So once the increase has occurred, it could not be reverted back. Suppose, as we said, that if the length of the plant has increased, it will not come back to the short height. Once it is attained, it may go further more taller, but it will not revert back to that short height. So these are usually the permanent effects. But in the case of growth independent effects, they can show revert back to the normal shape, as we had studied in the case of Mimosa pudica, that is touch me not plant. So these are the basics that we had already studied in the previous session. Now let us see that how these what are the different types of tropism and the nastic movements. So as we studied in the previous session that there are different types of stimulus, right? So on that basis, we are further classifying these tropic movements into various categories. The very first we are studying is the phototropism. So this phototropism is a directional movement of the plant or the part of the plant in response to light stimulus. So in this case, as the name itself is suggesting, photo, that means light. So here the stimulus is light, right? And it is tropism because the part of the plant which is exposed to light, it is going to show this directional movement. Either that plant or that part of the plant, it will bend towards the light, or towards it may be away from the direction from where the light is coming. So if the part of the plant moves towards the direction of the light, then it would be known as positive phototropism. Whereas if it is growing away from the light, then it would be known as negative phototropism. So this fact, that is regarding the phototropism, movements related to the response towards the light, it could be understood in your practical life also. It is very clearly understood that if we keep a plant in a gallery or in a corridor, then of course we can see the pattern of its bending, isn't it? You must have seen it, or you must have observed it. If you are keeping a pot and it is having a growing plant over there, and then the direction of light from where it is coming, this particular shoot or that stem of the part of the plant, it tends to bend towards the direction from where the sunlight is coming. So it is not going to bend towards the wall, isn't it? It bends in the opposite direction. That means it is towards the sunlight. So such type of example is an example of a positive phototropism. And what about the negative phototropism? Oppositely, we can observe that the roots of the plants, they generally shows negative phototropism. See, we can clearly understand this. Shoots always tends to grow upright above the soil, right? And the root, they tend to grow in the downward direction in the soil. Why is it so that roots do not grow in the upward direction also? What is the reason behind this? So one of the factor behind this particular fact is this type of stimulus. The root cells, they are more sensitive towards the photo light, and thus they tend to grow in the direction opposite to the direction from where the light is coming. So here we can say that the stem, they shows positive phototropism, whereas roots, they shows negative phototropism. This point, what we are discussing, it can be justified with the help of this small experiment. Even you can conduct it at your home also, and you must have observed it definitely. If you keep a plant, a seedling, or a plantlet in a beaker or in a conical flask or any object which is having a transparent wall, and it should be of course dipped in the water, because we have to study the pattern of roots also, right? So in this case, what we can say, in this beaker, this conical flask has been used for this purpose, and it is kept in a particular box, right? So this box is covering the plant from all the sides except one side, fine, and then it is kept in front of window, so that it can also receive the stimulus in the form of sunlight. Now what you can observe, the growth will begin, right? And as it is growing more and more, the shoot part will tend to bend towards the light, and the roots, you can see here in this diagram, these particular roots, it tends to grow in the opposite direction. So this particular thing, it can prove that the roots, they shows negative phototropism, whereas these shoot part will show the positive phototropism. Now you can see that there is the bending occurs when the stem has been grown. The bending occurs when the roots are further growing. So growth, what does it mean? Growth is an increase in the particular size, in terms of its number of the cells, or the size of the cell, or the mass of the cells, isn't it? And thus ultimately it is helping in the entire growth of the plant. Now the point is, these are not they are not directly giving any response. They are able to give this response towards the stimulus under the influence of the hormones. Now such hormones which are functioning in these particular plants, they are known as phytohormones. So now let us just understand that how these hormones are helping in the generation of such responses. So in this case, it is actually the movement is affected by the presence of a specific hormone, or we can say a group of hormones which is known as the auxins. So these auxins, they are present at the tip of the shoot. Over there they are helping in this type of process. Now with this diagram, it would be more easy to understand what we are discussing so far. Here the tip is shown here, and they are secreting the hormone, that is auxins. But when these particular tips are exposed to the sunlight, what will happen? See, when the sunlight is overhead, the IAA molecules produced by the apical meristem are distributed evenly in the shoot. What happens here actually? These IAA, it is an example of the hormone auxins. Now these auxins, they are actually stimulating the cell division process, cell elongation, and the enlargement. All these phenomena or all these processes are actually stimulated by the auxin hormones. Now as the sunlight is present, more and more auxin is going to be produced, right? But it is produced, but the site of action would be different. It can initiate, but it is still sensitive. It cannot show its own function at the site where more and more sunlight is present. So what happens? What happens is, once sunlight shines on the shoot at a particular angle, the IAA molecule will move to another side or to the far side. So what happens now? These particular IAA molecules, or the auxins which are secreted here, under the influence of sunlight, see, if the sunlight is coming from this particular direction, these molecules or the auxins, they tend to move towards the opposite direction. So now what will happen? As they move towards the opposite direction, so the site where these hormones are now present, over there more and more cell elongation will take place, then cell division or differentiation will take place, due to which it will increase the site. It is going to increase this particular this area or the size of this plant. Now as a result, what will happen? One side of a plant or this stem is actually elongated, the other is remaining comparatively it is not increased. So this will result in the bending. Now which side the bending is going to take place? Definitely the side which is taller tends to bend on the side where there is a short height. So in this side, in this diagram you can see that the hormones had increased the length on the left hand side, and thus the bending takes place towards the right hand side. So this sunlight, which is an stimulus in this case, it has actually altered the function of the auxins in a particular direction, and which is visible in the form of bending of the shoot towards the sunlight. So in which part the growth was taking place? It was on the opposite side from where the stimulus is coming in this case, right? And of course what we can visualize is the bending, right? And therefore we are saying that this bending is an effect, it is a movement which is the response given to a particular stimulus. So this is how the auxins are actually resulting in the particular type of movement, and thus they are showing that that this type of tropism is under the effect of the hormones. Well, the next type of tropism is geotropism. So geo, the word itself means what? Earth. And how this earth is serving as a source of stimulus? It is because of the gravity. What is this gravity? It is a force of attraction which is shown by the earth, isn't it? And that you are studying since long in your physics subject. So basically this gravity, it tends to attract the things towards the earth, right? Now how is it affecting the growth of the plant, or how it is serving as a source of stimulus for the plant? So basically let us first define this geotropism. This geotropism is the directional movement of the part of a plant in response to gravity. Now this particular growth, or as we are saying, tropism is always associated with a growth. So what does it mean here? If the plant or the part of the plant is growing or it is moving towards the gravity, then it is known as positive geotropism. But if it is moving away from the gravity, then it is known as negative geotropism. So what do you think? Which part is going to show this positive response and the negative response? The examples are mentioned here itself, like root, they always shows positive geotropism, and shoot, they always shows negative geotropism. That means root, they tends to grow in the downward direction towards the gravity, whereas the shoot, it tends to upright in the upward direction away from the gravity. And if it is growing away from gravity, the thing is actually growing towards the sunlight, because sunlight and gravity, they are located in the very opposite direction, isn't it? So this is the example that how these directional movements are taking place. If now one more thing you can compare, root, they are the positive, they are positively geotropic, right? But alternatively, if we compare it with the phototropic movement, then the roots are the negative phototropic. I mean, they are moving, they are negatively phototropic, isn't it? So what we can summarize here is that the particular part of organ is having different sensitivity for the different types of stimulus. If for something it is positively reacting, then towards the other it may be negative. And that is what is clear from the discussion about the phototropic movement and the geotropic movements. Now as we are saying that these plants, these roots are positively geotropic, and the shoots are negatively geotropic. So as we had proved in the case of phototropic movement, the same could be proved in this type of movement also. How? Let us summarize this point now. For this thing, you just observe this particular picture. Now actually what is happening here? You know, see, it is clear that these shoots are growing upward and the roots are growing downward. But let us find out that what we want to summarize, or what we want to clarify from this particular picture. Normally, see, if for this what you have to do is, you can take a particular pot and then you are filling it with the soil, right? And you are sowing up, you are growing a plantlet in this soil. But what you have to do extra is, you have to remove the base of the pot so that the roots will not have any limitation for their own growth. And then what you will do, you will tilt the position of the pot. So it is placed like this in this direction, in this particular diagram, and then when it tends to grow, then what will happen? You will see that once the plant or the shoot has started growing, it will move in the upward direction. It is going to bend in the upward direction, whereas the roots which were growing normally initially, now they tend to grow in the downward direction. Now what does it mean? What is there in this particular thing? Here we had not taken the light as a source of stimulus. Then how this bending is taking place in upward direction in the shoot? Because if the light is there, we can say that it is because of the photo or the light rays, isn't it? But in this case, we can maintain that condition. We can keep the conditions dark. So now what will happen? What other stimulus is present now? It is of course the gravity. There is no other extra source which we had added here in this particular experiment. So ultimately the conclusion is that the gravity can also serve as a source of stimulus for the plants, and the roots, they tend to show a negative positive response towards this gravity, and shoots, they tend to show the negative response to the gravity. Now the next type is chemotropism. Now chemo, as the name itself is suggesting, it is in this case the stimulus is supposed to be some chemical, right? So this chemotropism is a directional movement of a part of a plant which is given in response to any chemical. Now of course, if the movement or the part of the plant is going towards the chemical, then it would be known as the positive chemotropism. Whereas if it goes away from the chemical, it is known as negative chemotropism. Now these plants, they are actually exposed to various types of chemicals also, isn't it? Artificially many chemicals are being added in the soil in the form of some fertilizers or some weedicides or whatever, but they are of course exposed to the natural or synthetic chemicals all the time. And of course, if there is some stimulus, they will definitely show some of the response also. So if it is towards the stimulus, it would be known as positive chemotropism. Can you think of some example? In the case, like, let us just understand the natural process here. In this case, the process of fertilization or the growth of the pollen tube is one of the example of a positive chemotropism. What happens during fertilization? Initial phase of this sexual reproduction in the plant is the pollination. When the pollen grains are transferred to the female part of the plant, and it is stuck over stigma. And then what happens? There is a growth of a pollen tube, so that the male gametes from the pollen grains can be transported towards the ovule inside the ovary. Now for this pollen tube has to be, it has to grow, right? And how this pollen tube is actually growing? Now in this case, these particular parts are actually they are secreting some of the hormones which are supporting the growth of the pollen tube towards the ovule. And this is why the pollen tube is always growing from the upper part to the downward direction. That means it is able to stick over the stigma of the flower, and then the pollen tube starts generating and it starts growing downwards into this style, and then it is going towards the ovule. So such thing we can even observe in the picture also. Here is the diagram which is showing the process of positive chemotropism. That is, these pollen grains, they are coming through some different sources, like it can be a self-pollination or cross-pollination. In the case of self, it is in this case pollens, they have not to come from any other source. It is present within the flower only. But if it is coming from some other, the source may be like wind or air or water or some insects or whatever. And thus these pollen grains are actually placed over the stigma. And from here now, the next what happens is the germination of these pollen grains. What happens in this germination? During this, the pollen grains, they actually start developing a tube known as the pollen tube. And this pollen tube, it tends to grow in the downward direction towards the ovary or the ovules. And then over there, they are going to release the male gametes inside the ovary. So this generation of this pollen tube is an example of the chemotropism, as it is grown in response to a hormones secreted by the ovary. Practically, you can think like when you are watering a particular plant, what happens? Roots, they tend to grow more towards the downward direction and they help in the absorption of the water. And of course it is transported in the upward direction then. But what about the shoot? Are they tend to grow in the downward direction towards the water? No, it is growing in the upward direction always. Now even such a thing you can actually clearly or more precisely we can clarify it with the help of this particular diagram. It is a picture which is shown for a particular experiment. What you have to take is, in this what we have done is just place the soil in a particular transparent container. Okay, and then you are filling it with the soil completely, and in that you had added one porous pot, and that pot is actually filled up with the water. So the soil which is placed here is dry, and this is the water is present in the pot. Now on the other side we had actually sown it as a small seedling, and now you observe that how this growth is taking place. The seedling will give a rise, it will grow the shoot as well as the root part, and you can observe that these roots they tend to grow in the downward direction and the shoot is growing in the upward direction. And further you can see that at the tip the particular root is growing towards the water, or it is growing towards this porous pot, the place where the maximum water is placed, isn't it? The pot is actually porous, isn't it? So the water tends to move into the soil also. So that is giving an stimulus that from where more and more water is present. So this roots, it tends to go towards the site where more and more water is available. Whereas what about the shoot? This shoot tends to move in the upward direction, and you can see that there is some curvatures also which are found here. So this is how we can prove that the shoots are negatively hydrotropic, whereas the roots are positively hydrotropic. Another tropic movement is the chemotropism. Now this chemotropism, it is the directional movement of a plant path in response to the touch. Now touch, it is usually of a particular object. So this response which is given towards the touch is known as chemotropism. And how is it taking place? For that you can think about the climbers, how these climbers are growing. You must be aware of the growth, isn't it? Practically you can see that the climbers are growing, and when they get the support, they just form some tendrils over there which will wrap around this particular object, and then more and more growth will take place furthermore. So this touch will allow the change or alteration in some of the function of the hormones, and thus when the growth occurs, the length of the climbers occurs, it will take place in the forward upward direction. So this particular the another thing, the tendrils, they over there the growth is going to be somehow inhibited. Which part is growing more and more? The opposite part. So the tendrils, they tend to wrap around the particular support, and further more growth would be observed in the opposite part, isn't it? So which part is going towards the touch? That is tendrils. The opposite part, it is growing of course, and we can see that movement further, but that is actually negative because over there is no touch, isn't it? So these tendrils, they are the positively thigmotropic part of the plants, whereas the other parts which are growing further, they are supposed to be negatively thigmotropic. So this is how we can just summarize the basic different types of stimuli which are providing different sort of movements in the different types of plants. So this is all about the tropic movement. Further we will continue in the next session about the nestic movements. Till then, thank you so much. Have a nice day. Goodbye.